Yeah, so I remember what Padma had asked me. I didn't get emancipatory reason. I didn't get what that means, is what you had said. And
Yes, sir.
I'll get back to that. But just to kind of get ourselves into the groove again properly, uh, we were actually doing Habermas's critique of the mode of production. Uh, this is what the mode of production of Marx was. We were doing the critique of this by Habermas. I told you that the mode of production consists of two things: A, forces of production, and B, relations of production. And I had told you that the relationship between these two in Marx is a determinate relationship, which means that how people relate to each other depends upon how they work together. That is a determinate relationship. So, if the forces of production are egalitarian, then you'll probably get to see relations of production which are egalitarian as well. And I was giving you an example from within Karl Marx, where he says in the primitive mode of production, where the mode of production is egalitarian, the forces of production are egalitarian in the sense that there's no hierarchy. There's no hierarchy there. There is a division of labor, without doubt, but that is not a vertical division, it's a horizontal division. So, in the primitive mode of production, you find that people are working uh, together, doing things together uh, in an egalitarian way, which means that uh, one's work is not considered as superior, and the other person's work is not considered to be inferior. So that is reflected in the relations of production, which is what we normally would call social relations. But Marx doesn't, like I told you, he doesn't like using that word social too much. So he calls it relations of production. So in the primitive mode of production, since the forces of production are egalitarian, even the relations of production are egalitarian. That's what he says. But things change once, and I will teach why or how the changes occur from one mode of production to another mode of production. Uh, but the base superstructure model that we discussed as a part of this whole thing, uh, just before we were discussing this, I was talking to you about the base superstructure model. That is also something that Habermas doesn't believe that Marx is right about, because Marx talked about an economic base, which again seemed to determine the legal political superstructure. And I had given you an example of how the state, which is a legal political institution, can be a catalyst of economic change. So it's not like economic change has to take place first, and that is something that will get reflected in the legal political superstructure. Uh, so that is something that Habermas disagrees with. And if you remember what we were talking about in terms of the economic crisis in India, which was dealt with by P.V. Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh, there was a little bit of Chidambaram also in that, but that is a much smaller spoon than than say Manmohan Singh. It was actually Manmohan Singh's contribution that is the highest and the heaviest in bringing about that economic change. And it was done through the state, the executive, which is the organ of the government, takes on the responsibility of bringing about an economic change. So that whole structural adjustment program was initiated by the executive, which is an organ of the one of the organs of the government, and the government, which is one of the characteristics of the state. So that is the one that brings out the brings about the change in the economic structure. So Habermas was talking about those very kind of things when he said that it isn't always the economy that determines what happens in the legal political superstructure. There have been some, there has been rather, some defense of Marx When people talk about a relative superstructure and a relative base, okay, so what they are saying is, in Marx, there isn't a rigidity of what is the economic base, and what constitutes the base and what constitutes the superstructure. They say that uh, there is a possibility of fluidity in this. So you can possibly have uh, what is traditionally seen as the superstructure carrying out uh, changes in what is traditionally seen as the base. Uh, but I read Marx again when I uh, was told about this particular argument. Marx doesn't at any point in his work indicate this kind of fluidity where the subject of the base changes and the subject of the superstructure also changes. So you can't possibly say that sometimes the base is a legal political base, and that is leading to changes in the economic superstructure, in which case there is no need to have the base superstructure model at all. The moment you say there is a relatively economic base and a relatively economic. Yes, sir.
Sir, what is he implying by saying base and superstructure?
Base is what you don't see. Okay, it's a foundation. If you're more comfortable, you can use the term infrastructure, but it's not as if we don't get to see infrastructure. If you talk about road infrastructure, we get to see the roads, but roads are not a part of the superstructure. They are the part of the infrastructure. Okay. Similarly, electricity wires, at least in this country, they are a part of the infrastructure, but they are also above the surface, at least in this country. And even in Japan, even in a city like Tokyo, you'll see wires uh, over the ground, as we see here. So, what he means by the base is the processes that are happening under the surface. Under the surface, the processes that are happening that constitute the base, and what you see as the consequences of the processes that are taking place hidden from us under the surface are the legal political superstructure. And this is all in relation to that ideology, which he says is a certain kind of a blanket or a veneer that hides the truth from the people. Okay, so therefore, for him, ideological understanding is an incorrect understanding. It is the why did this man join so early today? Okay, so uh, you can basically uh, welcome one Mr. Gachiboli Divakar, though why he wants to subject himself to this class is best known to him rather than to any of us. Uh, Gachiboli Divakar is a lecturer in the Little Flower College, So he's joined us. He's my.
I just wanted to make a cameo appearance in your YouTube channel. That's why.
But you're not visible. Mhm.
No, my voice is enough, I guess.
That's. You want to do a cameo, you have to make yourself visible. Uh, okay. I speak to an invisible audience. Hmm. It's almost like I am blind. I can hear people, but I can't see them.
You just have
Uh,
to go by faith. Faith that, people are listening and not sleeping.
yeah. No, they do ask me questions. Just before you
Okay.
came, a question was raised, and I was answering that question.
Sorry for the interruption then.
No, it's not. I interrupted it. I could just have let you in and kept quiet about the whole thing. Yeah, so that's Varun. Varun is, he was my student in TISS and is presently pursuing his PhD under my haphazard supervision in OU. Okay, so uh, and he teaches at the Little Flower College. Uh, so to come back to what you had asked me, Akshay, Marx basically said that an ideological explanation is one that fails to understand the true reasons why certain things happen. Okay, and I remember having given you one example. That's not an example that Marx gave, but an example that I gave as an ideological explanation, which is if you say, if somebody asks me, why am I born, why am I poor? Okay, and why is somebody rich? Uh, One way of explaining that, and which has been done quite a few times in this country, is that we go by the karmic theory, which is that you had good enough karma to be born as a human being, but you didn't have a karma that was good enough to let you have a comfortable life. So, if you have good karma this time around, in your next birth, you will probably be born uh, as an upper caste, upper class, or whatever. And then you'll be closer to nirvana, which is the breaking of the cycle of life and death. Okay, so that is now this explanation, which is karmic, is for uh, Marx something which is completely unacceptable. And he says this is precisely what ideology is. It masks the truth. The truth is that this is a society that promotes, this is a society, that's the not keen, I'm sorry. The key word there is that this is a society that promotes inequality, makes some people poor, and makes other people rich. Now, this is again completely contrary to the claims made by the libertarians and the classical liberals. By classical liberals, I mean John Rawls, whose idea of the race the metaphor of the race, says that there is an equality of beginning. Okay. And there is an inequality of consequence. So the equality of beginning is ensuring that everybody starts the race at the same time. But Usain Bolt wins a 100 meters dash or a 200 meters dash ahead of everyone else, simply because he has been endowed with a better capacity to run faster over distances of 100 and 200 meters. He's been given that better capacity. So that is a natural thing. And if you look at the marathon runners, I've forgotten their names. Most of them come from Kenya for some strange reason. They'll probably not even qualify in the heats, as they are called, of the 100 meters dash. But they can run for their whole life. They can keep running at a very steady pace. And therefore, they are Olympic gold medalists. Most of the Olympic gold medalists, women and men in the marathon, are from Kenya. Okay, so then you say that, well, they all started to run together, but the Kenyans run longer and they run faster than the others were running longer. Usain Bolt, I doubt if he can run the marathon. He definitely, I don't think he can run the marathon. And even if he can run the marathon, he'll be somewhere at the end, not at the beginning. So he's not going to win a marathon. If he could win a marathon, he would have run a marathon. So what people like the libertarian, what people like classical liberals argue is that uh, inequalities are those which are there in nature. And Rawls argues against this, and he says, where is everybody getting equality of beginning? And Nozick's answer to that is that he says, there is no need to handicap anyone. There is no need to share what Rawls called the primary social goods. Nozick says once most primary private property is his ability. So doesn't matter where you're born. Doesn't matter what you are, where you're born. If you have the ability to make money, you will. So I suppose you could show instances like Dhirubhai Ambani, who started off apparently as a 6-anna coolie, but he built the Reliance empire. And of course, we know that there were several murders and other things along the way. But he did. He grew out of abject poverty to become one of the richest men in India. And his elder son uh, has proved that he has his father's mettle. So he has gone on to become a success, whereas the younger one became insolvent, right? So this kind of a thing will be used by Robert Nozick to say, look at these two brothers. One is doing so well. One's got this geo platform into which everybody wants to invest. And then there is the other idiot, Anil Ambani, who went bankrupt, and it's sheer crony capitalism and Modi's munificence which have bailed him out, at least for now. Let's see what happens with the Rafale aircraft project. Unless that comes to proper fruition, Anil Ambani is not out of the woods. So Robert Nozick will say, look at that, two brothers. Yes, Mr. Varun.
But in this example that you are citing, sir, both these brothers had an equal starting point, right?
Yes.
Which sort of bypasses Robert Nozick's claim that starting point doesn't matter.
No, what he says is that if you have it in you, you can rise above your problems. If you don't have it in you, you succumb to your problems.
Okay.
So I'm not giving you the example of Mukesh Ambani as a success. I'm giving you the example of Dhirubhai Ambani as a success, and I'm giving you the example of Anil
Anil Ambani
Ambani,
as
who's
a failure.
born into riches,
Right,
becoming
right.
bankrupt.
Got it.
Okay, so that is the thing. Mukesh Ambani, that's why I didn't name him there. I didn't name him.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So I hope that clears up the libertarian position. So for them, it really doesn't matter where you're born. They say all that Rawls says is nonsense. There are no such things as primary social goods that you require. These are all not sustainable things. And Nozick therefore argues that look at the case of rags to riches stories and riches to rags stories as well. So he says any kind of inequality is only natural. There isn't anything. So which is going one step further from classical liberalism, which at least says equality of beginning and inequality of consequence. Okay, so for the libertarians and specifically for Robert Nozick, there is no need for equality of beginning either. Okay, you don't need that. If you have it in you, you will become rich. That is what he says. Now, that is open to a number of questions again, but I'm not going to go into that. That is just to tell you how people have looked at inequalities. Whereas Marx's construct of inequalities is that all inequalities are purely social. There isn't anything called a natural inequality. Whatever inequality exists because it's a purely social inequality. Okay, and that is why if you take away if you say that the base and the superstructure are relative to each other, then you are making that whole base superstructure model redundant. Why have that base superstructure model at all? You know, if the base is not a determinate base, and if the superstructure is also not a determinate superstructure, and if the base is not determining the nature of the superstructure, then why talk about the base and superstructure at all? So that becomes a very significant question, and that is precisely the question that Habermas asks. Then why talk about the If you're going to defend Marx by saying relative base and relative superstructure, then why talk about the base and superstructure at all? That is the question that Habermas asks, and very rightly so. So he therefore says that that is a flawed model. Similarly, he says the mode of production model itself is a flawed model because he says forces of production need not determine relations of production. Okay, or let's put it this way, the nature of forces of production need not determine the nature of relations of production, because forces of production are limited to the time that we are playing a role in the production process. Okay, that is only the time. So I had also given you an example about this. If you say you're my students and I'm your teacher, that is only as long as we are in a college. And when I say that we are in a college, I mean physically. Of course, the pandemic has made this kind of classes also possible. So I am a teacher and you're my student as long as I'm teaching you something. Okay, whether it is in a physical location or it is being done digitally through a platform like Zoom or any other platform. So unless we are in this situation where I am your teacher, I'm actually your teacher, which means that I'm being your teacher, teaching you, and you are being my students listening to me. That is restricted to only the college. Now, you people come to me, I put this as AVR Institute, that's a different issue altogether. But where did I meet you? Half of you, I met you in PG college. Half of you, I met you in arts college. So these are the locations where I was your teacher. So technically, for the PG college students, I'm no longer their teacher. I'm no longer their teacher. They are no longer my students. Okay, because I don't go to that college. I don't teach them in that college. This is an exception. Okay, this is a complete exception. This is a situation of mutual understanding. This is a situation of mutual understanding. This class that we have in the evening. But in the morning, do I teach their classes in PG college? I don't. I don't teach their classes there. So I'm not their teacher anymore. So I can't say if I meet Prashant or if I meet Rakesh or if I meet Ujwala, I can't possibly say these are my students. They are not. They are not my students anymore. Technically, they are not at all my students anymore. Okay. So that is what Habermas says. Our role play in the forces of production is only during the hours where we are working. So I might be a supervisor, you might be a shop floor worker, somebody else may be my manager, somebody else may be that manager, above that manager who is a director. And very rarely do the shop floor workers actually get to see the directors, the CEOs. Very rarely do people get to see them. I believe in the industry that still has a shop floor, which is the automobile industry. It's only in Maruti Suzuki, which has a very Japanese kind of an atmosphere, that people sit together and eat together in the same canteen, starting with the chairman and managing director down to the lowest factory worker. And by the time the chairman and managing director comes into the canteen, if the places are all taken, in normal situations, people will get up and make way. People will leave an entire table to this chairman and managing director. But it doesn't happen in Maruti Suzuki. And apparently in other, I don't have information about other Japanese companies, but I do know that this happens in Maruti Suzuki. The chairman and managing director has to wait till he can find a place. And if he's sitting next to a lowly shop floor worker, he has to sit there. He has to sit there because while they are eating, he is not the CMD. And that chap who's sitting there is not a worker. You're just two human beings who are eating. The hierarchy kicks in once you go into the production process. Once you go into the production process, once you resume your roles after lunch as a shop floor worker and as the chairman and managing director, that is when once again your roles as whatever will kick in. And once the day is done and people have gone home, they are no longer your workers, nor are you their chairman and managing director. Nor are you their chairman and managing director. Right? And even the government laws say that it is the responsibility of the government with reference to their employees, the well-being of their employees, is only up to the point. It starts at the time when a person leaves for office and doesn't take a detour to do something else before coming to office. It is the government's responsibility. The employee is the government's responsibility. If he leaves his office, his house, to come straight to the office with no detours. And the responsibility of that employee ends when this person goes from his place of work straight to his home without a detour. If he takes a detour for some other reason, then it is not the government's responsibility. The reason why I tell you this is that if you die while you're working, then your emoluments that you get are higher than the emoluments that you would get if you die at home when you're not working. Okay, so we had this instance in PG College where one of the teachers died on the way to work. So he was considered as having died while working, and therefore he was paid substantially higher gratuity, and all those kind of perks which normally are given. He was given higher because it is considered as dying while working. So if I die at my place of work, the benefits for my family are higher. So you see, so even the government is trying to tell you that only if once you leave home, only if you're coming straight to work, you have to establish that. You have to establish that, and that also includes, they'll do this thing of the road that you take. Is that the road, is that the right road to take to get to your place of work? So all those things have to be established. Otherwise, you're not considered as being at work. You're not considered as being at work. Say, for example, I'll say I have a little bit of free time, which is what I used to do when I was secretary of the SPCA. I, in between classes, at that time I was posted at Women's College, Koti. I used to, when I had a 2-hour gap between classes, I would just make a quick dash to the SPCA office, because I was the secretary, to see if things were going on properly, because in those days we were doing the animal birth control operations. So if I had died going to the SPCA or coming back from the SPCA, then I wouldn't have been considered as being at work, because technically I'm not supposed to leave this office without permission, and I wasn't taking permission. I said, who will care? I'm not teaching. This is my free time, so I'll just make a quick dash. It was not very far, so I would just go there, have a look, see everything is all right, and come back. But if I died in that process, then it would basically mean that I'm not at work. That is the thing that will be inferred. I'm not at work. So this is the kind of argument that Habermas is making. Forces of production, you cannot say that these are the ones that also determine the relations of production. But there is a pretty strong counter argument to Habermas, which is, how many people actually realize this? How many people actually realize this? Okay, people who have been my teachers in the past, okay, my teachers in the past, 30 years ago, I still, out of respect for the fact that they were my teachers, I call them sir or ma'am or whatever. Okay, which I needn't do. I can just call them by their name. If it is a little bit of an embarrassment to call them by their first name, at least, use a designation and say, but Professor so-and-so or Dr. so-and-so. You can address them like that, right? And Americans, of course, are irreverent. So they call their teachers by their name if they're outside the class. In the class, they call everyone a professor. Even if you're not a professor, you're called Professor so-and-so. So that is the reason why I was surprised a couple of times. I was asked, are you a full professor? And I said, what rubbish is this? You know, this is an army language where they ask you if you're a full colonel. That is because in the army, even if you are a lieutenant colonel, people will not call you lieutenant colonel. They'll call you colonel. Okay, if you're a lieutenant general, they will call you general, right? So when you say I'm a full colonel, that means that you are a colonel and not a lieutenant colonel. Similarly, if you say I'm a full general, and they also have stars, a 4-star general, a 3-star general. So that is your actual status. So a couple of places I was asked, are you a full professor? And I was just thinking, can I be a half professor? And then I understood that these people were using an Americanism. It's an Americanism because in America, irrespective of you being an assistant professor or an associate professor, you are actually called a professor by your student and with your name. So people will call me while sitting in a class, they'd say, Professor Chandra. It used to be very strange. Okay. And then when I come out, they'd say, Satish. Outside of the class, they'd say Satish. Youngsters. Okay. Absolute youngsters. They'd say Satish. And inside, they'd say Professor Chandra. So you see that there are all these problems. In the old Europe and in even contemporary India, we still do have the continuation of the relations that are formed in the forces of production. We take them into the sphere of social relations as well. Okay. Very rarely do you find somebody asking help or somebody who works for you. You rarely ask them to take a seat on a chair. You don't say sit in a chair, and you don't invite them right into your house, and you don't do these things. So this was pointed out to Habermas. So Habermas says this is not a problem with the forces of production. It is not a problem with relations of production. This has got nothing to do with forces or relations of productions. It has everything to do only with a deficit in rationality. Now, Habermas is very fond of using this word deficit because Habermas also talks about legitimation crisis, and that's in a different context, of course. And he says inevitably deficit in legitimacy is what leads to the legitimation crisis. Okay, so he talks about the legitimation deficit. Here he's talking about a deficit in rationality. If you are driven only by instrumental reason, sometimes called by some people only if you are driven by this instrumental or technocratic rationality, a more, it's a translation thing again, because uh, he's German, he wrote in German. So mostly it's called instrumental reason. Some people call it technocratic rationality. So yet again, so choice of words, but more people will understand instrumental reason and less people will understand technocratic rationality, because that is something that's not used by too many writers on Habermas. So if you're driven only by that instrumental reason, then you have a tendency to confuse the two. You look at your servant as a servant even outside the context of your work, even outside the context of your work. Okay, you will look at them as servants and treat them as servants, even if you're meeting them outside the context of work. So that is the deficit in rationality. What is the deficit? The deficit is okay, that becomes the deficit. The lack of emancipatory reason or rationality. You see, you find a very similar argument being used by this person, Joshua Cohen, who was a student of Rawls and who has done some pioneering work on what is today called deliberative democracy. Okay, Joshua Cohen talks about this deliberative democracy. A lot of other people also now talk about it. I tried it. In fact, I wrote a book on democracy, the problems, the theoretical problems with it in the context of India, and how those problems can be overcome by clubbing electoral democracy with deliberative democracy. I gave a copy of it to good friend Varun, who still hasn't read that book. I don't know. I gave him about 4 years back, I think.
No, I don't have that book with me.
Really? I didn't give you a copy of it?
No, you gave me critical theory, but not deliberative democracy.
What critical theory? The one that I wrote. I didn't write anything on.
Acha, the book that you wrote. I thought you gave me a book by Joshua Cohen. No,
No.
your book I read it. Yeah,
You read the full book?
yeah.
Okay. I thought you didn't. I used that concept and I regret it. Anyway, so I said in that book, the deliberative democracy claim that Joshua Cohen talks about is that since there are limitations on electoral democracy in terms of representation, right? Remember the example I keep giving you. Let's say there is a constituency of 100 people and all there are two people contesting an election, A and B. A gets 51 votes and B gets 49 votes. Who wins the election? In most instances, it is a simple majority system. It is A who wins the election, but 49 people, which is almost half of the constituency, has voted against him. They have voted against him. They don't want him to represent them, but he's representing them. And that makes that person autonomous. Autonomous as in he now is, you don't know which people voted for you, which people didn't vote for you, because it's all secret ballot. So he gets scot-free. He doesn't represent anyone. He represents himself or herself, which is what the problem with electoral democracy is, especially Indian electoral democracy. And the beauty of the United States of America is that Donald Trump loses by a couple of million votes in the popular election, but 538 people in that a majority vote for him. So he is considered president and not Hillary Clinton, whom apparently the general people wanted as their president. So who's representing whom? That is a question. The Electoral College is supposed to be elected by the people. That is what they are doing, right? And so they have to represent the interests of their constituents. But everything is secret ballot. In the secret ballot, nobody knows who's done what. So secret ballot in democracy is an anti-democratic device. Anyway, let me not go in that direction. But what I'm trying to say is Joshua Cohen says that a deliberative democracy is where you form associations, local associations, not very big ones. You form small associations like colonies, townships, and everybody gets to speak in those meetings. And the precondition that Joshua Cohen lays down for these meetings is that if I am there in it, and if my housemaid, as they are called in America, also lives in the same area where I am, and is therefore a member of that deliberative community, she has no standing as a housemaid. I don't have a standing as the person who pays a salary. We meet there as citizens of the country. That's it. We meet as citizens of the country. not as master servant. No, we don't. So if my servant says something, it has the same weight as what I say. Now, I tried building up a community like that in my colony, and people were just not interested. I gave up. I actually tried doing it. Okay, I said, why write a book and get away with it? Actually, let's try to see if I can build a community. I approached my neighbors and everyone, nobody was interested. ये क्या होता है भाई साहब? Nothing will come out of it. So that's one of the problems, apathy, but that's different. But what I'm trying to say here is that this so-called emancipatory reason, which you see in Habermas, is something that you find even in Joshua Cohen. You find it in Richard Rorty. You find it in Richard Rorty, okay, where he believes that emancipatory reason, all of them believe this. Habermas, Cohen, and Rorty, they all believe in the idea that emancipatory reason is Does that make sense to you, Madam Padma?
Yes, yes, sir. Yes.
So you should be able to empathize with someone, even if that person is a beggar, he has a genuine problem. You should be able to empathize with that person. And that is embracing humanity. I think I told you once before when I was talking about Rorty. Rorty was one of the first people to have appreciated this whole thing about emancipatory reason that Habermas talked about. And you will find dollops of this kind of thinking in Richard Rorty. Okay, and when Rorty died, and he died a very young man, relatively these days, he died in his 60s, 61, I think he was, not very sure though. There was an obituary written by Habermas out of deep respect for Richard Rorty, in which he said, if it was up to Richard Rorty to create a world based on one emotion, then that emotion would be love for everyone. That is the obituary that Habermas, who's not normally not a very emotional person, he wrote this obituary to Richard Rorty. Okay, that love for everyone is what would be the world that Richard Rorty would ultimately like to construct. So you see that that's what emancipation is. And funnily enough, I'm going to stop here now. Funnily enough, Marx believed that the revolution, however bloody it might be, will ultimately lead to the emancipation of humanity from these structures of social oppression that people have built around themselves. Okay, he says the structures of oppression and inequality have been built around themselves by people, and these can be dismantled only by the working class revolution, because the working class embodies all the things that are necessary for a humanity, for one human race. All the things that are necessary for that are there in the human race. So he said the working class revolution not only emancipates the workers from their inferior and exploited status, but it also emancipates the capitalist from his lopsided thinking, where he thinks just because he has money, he is superior to others. So there is the emancipatory component in Marx. So don't be under the impression that Marx didn't think of emancipatory reason. But the difference between Habermas and Marx is, when does emancipatory rationality kick in? For Marx, emancipatory rationality kicks in only with the working class revolution and the subsequent dictatorship of the proletariat. And Joseph Stalin, unfortunately for Marx, proved him completely wrong. So that is one thing. And the other thing is that Habermas is right. Habermas is absolutely right that you can have emancipatory rationality. I've seen that in these people who are called Khandani Muslims. They don't address their servants as tum. They address them as aap. And even if they have to reproach them about something, they wouldn't do it in a rude and raised voice, nor would they use terms which are insulting. They would say things like, जब आप काम कर रहे हैं तो आप उस पे अपना सोच उस पे रखिए, दूसरे चीजों के बारे में मत सोचिए. that would be a reproach. And that is emancipatory reason. He's calling him up, even though that person is his worker. And he's only trying to tell him, don't think of other things while you're doing your work. Think of what you have to do. So it's not at all wrong, I think, on Habermas's part to basically believe, that one should emphasize emancipatory rationality separately. Those who cannot distinguish between instrumental reason and emancipatory reason are not very intelligent people for Habermas. And you don't need a revolution to inculcate that in people. He says you can do that through sheer instruction. So therefore, he believes that this forces of production determining the relations of production is a wrong construct. It is a completely wrong construct as far as Habermas is concerned. And I always tell people Marx is my hero, without a doubt. But I do think Habermas is right. I do think Habermas is right. But the impact of Marx on the world, I think, is something that no one else has had. He changed liberalism to accept welfarism. That kind of thing, even Gandhi, whom I hold in higher esteem than Marx personally, but I think even Gandhi didn't have that kind of an impact on the world. Despite Marx having failed primarily in his mission and Gandhi having succeeded in his mission, you would see that the impact of Marx as a thinker is more than Gandhi. That is possibly because of the fact that Marx was thinking of a more holistic, worldwide phenomenon, whereas Gandhi was restricted to India in his thought. Though he was capable of thinking about the world, which he did, his admiration for Jesus Christ and the Sermon on the Mount, his admiration for Tolstoy, all those things show that he was not somebody, and he had read the Vedas. He was a great scholar. No doubt about that. This is a side of Gandhi that nobody knows. That he was a scholar. Okay, and despite all that, it was somehow restricted to India. It didn't have that more Catholic and secular feeling. So we'll end here. Any questions? Throw. No questions? This is becoming like the army thing, you know. No questions, only orders. That's the motto of the army. If you're given an order, execute the order. Don't say why. I think I told you my experience with NCC, and once I questioned an officer, got hit on my face. And that's when I decided that this is an inhuman institution, the army. It dehumanizes people. It makes automatons out of people. So while I do respect the fact that our soldiers are guarding our frontiers while we sleep peacefully in our beds, I do respect that. But I think that I'm reminded of that Animal Farm conversation between Boxer the horse and Benjamin the donkey, where Boxer tells Benjamin, I think we should be thankful to God that he has given us tails to drive away the flies. And Benjamin's response to that is, I'd rather not have a tail and not have any flies at all. I think that sums up wonderfully how I feel about the army. Well, I'm thankful to these soldiers who are working in an hospitable climate and in terrible working conditions while we sit in comfort, but I'd rather not have the army at all. Seriously, I'd rather not have the army. I keep telling people, please don't see Terminator, the rise of the machines and all that. You know, the rise of the machine happened long ago. It happened with the Romans. The army is that machine that you're talking about. It's not the army is not human. There's nothing remotely human about the army. Remotely. It's an inhuman institution. The armed forces, especially the infantry, which is what is actually called the army. The technical name for that is the infantry, foot soldiers. They are the worst affected. Really. I don't think we need these. So any questions?
No, sir.
What, Akshay Pantulu garu? If you let me go scot-free like this, then I'll become overconfident. Okay. So thank you very much.
Sir,
Yes,
I want
ma'am.
to ask one question.
Please.
I was just framing that in my mind. When Habermas says that the forces need not determine the relations, but the relations at the initial stage remain the fact, right? For example, a student-teacher relation. For a teacher, a student is a student, and for a student, it's a teacher. So the relation will not change, right?
No, it changes. That's exactly what I said. You know, when in America, when I entered the class, I was called Professor Chandra. When I came out, the same people who called me Professor Chandra would call me Satish. And they're what, 18, 19? So
but the fact remains the same also, that a teacher is a teacher.
no, it doesn't for them. Therefore, I think they are a lot more emancipated than us. They are. I keep calling my teachers sir even today. Okay, even today I call my teachers sir, and I don't find it particularly wrong in a student-teacher relationship. I don't find it very wrong because a teacher, if he's a good one, is somebody who's giving you something to think about. He's equipping you, if not with anything, he's equipping you with all the things that you require in order to be a good student and become a good person. So my teachers have done that, some of them, not all of them. Most of them have done that. But I don't think that this will be applicable to other uh, fields. Like, for example, if somebody is a shop floor worker and somebody is a supervisor, why should that person be somebody's supervisor even outside of the shop floor? So I think you have to nuance this a bit. You have to nuance this a bit because the roles that good teachers play, are they last throughout your life. And the roles that bad teachers play, they are over in a day. In fact, they shouldn't be at all in your life. And you know what kind of people I'm referring to. So why would you want to call them your teachers? Really, why would you want to call them your teachers? I know for a fact that in my own days, we knew whom to respect and whom not to respect as students. We knew that. And just because somebody holds a designation, I'm coming to you. Just because somebody holds a designation, it doesn't mean that you automatically think of them as your teachers. Somebody who does justice to that particular designation is the one whom you should respect. Yes, Varun.
So this also raises the question of the applicability of Habermas's thought, because the context in which he gave this kind of a theory and the experiences in his life, in his own life, which sort of fed into his thought and ultimately resulted in him giving these theories, it is quite different from the kind of experiences you would find in a country like India. So shouldn't we also factor in that the kind of society that he lived in and the kind of society which he experienced, based on which he gave this theory, is qualitatively different from the kind of society that we have? Like
How?
in India, the example that you were giving of a shop floor worker and a manager,
Mhm.
it would not be, completely illogical to expect a shop floor worker and manager to carry that outside the shop also. If the manager, I mean, if the manager were to visit the house of a shop floor worker, they would probably give him the best of hospitality treatment and all that, something which they won't give for their own relatives and all. So it carries out even out of the workspace in a society like ours.
No,
Um,
that is a backward society which hasn't understood the meaning of emancipation.
And I'm not even talking in this
Now,
example, I'm not even going to the point of the traditional relations of in where you have the Dora system and all these. That is even more,
absolutely,
yeah,
I don't agree with that.
yeah.
I don't think you should have had the Dora system. That is feudalism is
No,
gone,
that is
done,
not what I'm
dusted.
questioning here. What I'm saying
Mm,
is the applicability of Habermas's theory to a system like in India, where you find
No,
the
but you
feudal.
did find the equivalence of the Dora system in Germany as well.
Okay.
Germany saw feudalism.
Okay.
Germany saw feudalism, and Germany saw capitalism much, much later than than say an England did.
Mhm.
Even though the Protestant ethic actually took its birth in Germany, the effects of it were more in England, thanks to King Henry VIII, converting the whole country into Protestant and making himself the head of the Church of England, the Anglican Church as it is called. So
Mhm.
there are historical factors there as well. But that should not stand in the way of emancipatory reason.
So this brings me to the second question.
Hmm.
So if someone were to ask me to evaluate Habermas's concept of emancipatory reasoning and all, now
Hmm.
how would I evaluate that? Because based on itself, if it has to stand on its own logic, it seems very sound. But when we pick that up and apply it to the present day society, and I mean 2020 and 2021 also, it sort of appears like a weak theory because it's nowhere to be found. Nowhere meaning in majority of
No,
the places.
no, I don't agree.
Okay.
I have ignored, I've seen some of my teachers from the
Mm-hmm.
past who were horrible. Okay.
Hmm.
And so when I've seen them, I have not made an attempt to go and say hello to them. I just walked away. Okay. I didn't feel the necessity to have any kind of a conversation with those kind of people. And whereas somebody like Sudipta Kaviraj, I've gone in search of that man. I've gone in search of that man to find him and say hello to him. Okay. Whereas the others, when I ran into them, I didn't, I didn't feel the necessity to pay any kind of respect and say hello, sir, or whatever.
But for
I
every
didn't.
example that you give like this, I can also give you an example. Like, let's say you take the example of weddings. Now, when I go out and give invitations to my weddings, I make it a point to
Hmm.
give the first or the second or whatever invitation to my employer and probably the boss, let's say the school in which I'm working.
Hmm.
I would make sure that I give it to him in a special manner. And if at all he turns up at my function, I would reserve the front seat and probably I would get down the stage and meet him. So there are examples like this as well, where the
Now, so you're giving a wedding example. So let me give you.
no, this is not a question of numbers.
I'm going to tell you something from my own wedding. When my wedding was happening, the vice chancellor and his wife came, basically
Right.
because of the vice chancellor's wife. Okay, she saw me. She was at that time. She was posted at Nizam College. She saw me work and she saw me make changes to the curriculum and all that, and she was very, very happy with me because she was one of those people who encouraged people to do some good work. So they turned up at my wedding, I think at her instance, otherwise the vice chancellor wouldn't have come on his own. Now, when they came, there was, we were in the middle of one particular ceremony. Now, I actually told my father that I don't want to have a, a traditional wedding. But my father said, I understand your sentiments, I respect them, and that those are my sentiments as well. But I want one thing here, which is that you're marrying somebody who is half Indian and half European, half English. Uh, if I do a registered wedding as If we go in for a registered wedding as you want, then the interpretation of the people will be that they did this because they were embarrassed about who was becoming their daughter-in-law. So I said, should that matter at all? Let people think what they want to think. I don't care. I don't give two hoots. He said, you don't care. You don't give two hoots. All that is fine. But think of it from the side of Maya. Think of it from her side. Wouldn't she feel much better if something is done publicly? People are called, and if it looks like you have the support of the entire family, wouldn't it look much better? So I said, okay, not for her, not for me, but for her. For her, the acceptance, meeting of the whole family, people distance, people in various parts of the country, they would all come. So otherwise, if you do a registered wedding, when will she meet the family? How will she meet the family? So he said, this is one place where I want you to relent. I've never ever asked you to relent on your system of beliefs, but here, please relent. Not for your sake, but for the girl's sake. I said, okay. So we were going through this, I don't know, I don't even remember what that ceremony was called. All I remember is that there was some homam happening there, and the vice chancellor walked in, and as usual, he came with a retinue of people, and one of them was my ex-teachers, and he said, get up, the vice chancellor is here, get up. Okay, that's what he said. And the priest who was performing the wedding said, nothing doing. While this ceremony is on, you should not get up. You will not get up.
All
So
right.
I didn't get up, and and his wife pulled a chair, sat right next to us, and I said, ma'am, I'm really sorry that we couldn't get up when you and sir have come. She said, no, that's perfectly all right. If you're not supposed to get up during that ceremony, you shouldn't get up.
I mean, come on. The objection there is about the sanctity of the ceremony. But
No,
had
what
it
I'm
been
trying to tell
something else,
you, what I'm trying to tell you,
you would. Okay.
what I'm trying to tell you
Huh.
is that they showed an emancipatory rationality, thinking, yes, there is a sanctity to that ceremony, and therefore they should not get up. He didn't think like a vice chancellor, neither did the lady think like a wife of a vice chancellor and a senior colleague of mine.
But the cohort which was asking you to get up, they were thinking, right?
They were thinking,
So
but
this
I
is my
didn't get
point.
up, did I?
No, this is my point.
So
I'm not going into the number of examples that you can cite and I can cite.
no,
But
so that's what it's
I hope
becoming ultimately.
no,
That's
but
what,
I
no,
at least
that's what
hope
it's
that you agree
becoming.
with me when I say there are substantial number of
There
people.
are, there
Yeah,
are, there are.
and
There
keeping
is
that in mind,
absolutely no doubt about that.
and
But that's
yes,
precisely what I'm trying to say. That what does that indicate? It indicates a society that's backward in terms of its emancipatory rationality.
okay,
And here I would say, I would quote Gandhi and say, if you want change, first you be that change. Okay, so my drivers, my maid servant, when she comes to work, I don't allow her to sit on the floor.
okay,
My driver sits on a chair. My maidservant will sit on a chair.
So
Okay. And if she has a little bit of time, she actually goes to sleep. She actually goes to sleep, not on a bed, of course, because,
okay.
but I let her sleep if she feels tired and whatever. I don't say, hey, this is your work time. Why are you sleeping?
Right. So
Mm.
when I circle back to my original question about the evaluation of Habermas's theory of emancipatory reason, can I call it a theory or is it a
No, it's just a
simple
concept.
concept? Okay, the
Yeah.
concept of emancipatory reason. Going by what you said, it would be a good concept. It would be a good concept for prescribing a kind of prescribing a pattern of actions which should lead to a better society. But as a concept that is, if I have to use it to explain the state of things, it is
Mm.
found to be lacking, right?
No, it explains a backward society.
Okay.
No, 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 no.
No,
Seriously,
I get it. I get it.
no.
Yeah.
What I'm saying, when I gave you that example of America,
Yeah.
what happens in America is possible only in America. Okay.
Okay.
And the reason is because all the people who went there, the early immigrants who went from Europe, the old continent, as they called it, from the old continent to the new world, all the people who went there went minus the baggage of this, because the lords were not going to leave Europe and go to America.
Hmm.
Okay. The aristocrats were not going to leave and go to America. And the Americans the Europeans who ended up in America were all working class. And that is why there's a great dignity of labor in America, which is not there in Europe even today. Because Europe is still caught in its old values. In America, as long as you're earning your money through truthful means, even if you're doing a lowly job, you are respected for earning your money in a way which is truthful, honest. They respect that because the people who ended up there were the working class who knew the value of work. Those societies that cannot respect these are the ones that have had either feudalism at some point or some other kind of hierarchical structures.
Right.
Hierarchical structures, and we are unable to break free of those hierarchical structures.
And did he give a reason as to why we are not able to do that?
Lack of emancipatory reason. So
Okay.
in his own country, he said people should stop writing "fon" in their names.
Mm-hmm.
So a "fon" is like, you're an exalted person in society.
Mm.
So the book that I gave you, Otto Gierke,
Mm.
his name originally, he used to write Otto von Gierke.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he gave up. He stopped using "von." Okay,
Okay.
he stopped using. He just said, "I'm Otto Gierke now." So now, when Led Zeppelin, the rock band,
Mm.
when they wanted to perform in Germany, the von Zeppelin family, everybody knows the Zeppelin as the airship, right?
Mm.
Nobody knows why it was called the Zeppelin. It was called the Zeppelin because Count von Zeppelin was the one who financed the building of the airship.
Hmm.
And since these people called themselves Led Zeppelin, the widow of Count Zeppelin, Count von Zeppelin, she said they can't perform in Germany under the name of Led Zeppelin. They can't use our family name. So a rock band is a revolutionary thing, right?
Yeah.
Rock music is not about
Rocks.
goody things
Right.
like classical music. It's not like that. So rock music is all about giving the middle finger, which is exactly what they did. And they said, you want to go to court, go to court. And they insisted that they play as Led Zeppelin. It became a court case. And the lady lost the case because they asked her, are you the only family that is called Zeppelin? No, there were so many other families. So if there are so many other people who are Zeppelins, why do you think you have a right over that name? You don't have a right over the name Zeppelin. It's not a trademark. It's not a trademark. So they played as Led Zeppelin. So
Right.
you see, change can be made. It just needs that protest.
Right. And I'm sorry to continue this, but just one doubt, just a technical doubt. When you said that societies like ours are backward in terms of emancipatory reasoning, was that terminology used by Habermas also?
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
No, my pleasure. I think you people must be exhausted.
No, sir, it was
No, sir.
interesting to see both of you conversing.
Okay, thank you. But, these discussions you should never have with instances of who does what. You have to take a holistic view. You have to take the view that the whole is larger than the sum of all its parts. So if we keep taking examples from some of the parts, or if we keep taking examples from the parts, then if you show one part, I can show another part. So one has to take a holistic view of the thing rather than that of the parts. Only then will we be able to have a meaningful conversation. Otherwise, as they say in Hyderabad, tu to mai. That's what it becomes. So thanks, Varun.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So we meet again tomorrow.
By the way, when you said the army person hit you on the face, that is just a euphemism for slapped you, right?
No,
Oh,
he,
it
didn't-
could. To what?
he did this with his 3 fingers, and like that, he hit me on this side of my face.
That's probably a reverse slap or something.
It's not exactly a slap, uses the palm.
Okay.
He used the knuckles of his fingers.
Which is even worse, I guess.
Yes, it is. It is. It is. It is. So tomorrow, when we meet, shall we pick up a little bit of political analysis? Shall we start with an introduction to behavioralism? Is that okay with you, or do you have something else in mind?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, we'll
Yes,
do
sir.
that.
Because you have to know this. This is, as political science students, You have to know this. I'm not going to spend too much time teaching it like it's a semester course. It'll be a compromised kind of teaching, but at least you'll know what is what. I'll put the most important points across to you.
Okay, sir.
So it'll take a few classes. Okay,
Yes, sir.
thank you.
You didn't stop the recording, sir.
Yes, I'm going to do that.